Hello and welcome back. This is Sherry with Heart and Soulful, back in the studio today with another coffee dyeing experiment. So I've decided this will be the last video in this series. I think it's number 4, I want to say. And I've decided to do the last 2 techniques together in one video for a couple of reasons. And they're going to involve these 2 last techniques I've put together, which may seem kind of odd, but it's because I ended up in my experiments combining the 2 ideas. So it involves stencils, coffee, and then also bubbles. So if you may have seen other videos where you use bubbles to create a design on coffee stained paper, and you may have seen videos where you use stencils. And so I've combined the 2 in this experiment, and the beginning of this video is going to be kind of a show and tell of the experiment and the papers and kind of how I did them. And then I will do just a quick demo. Because we've had the 3 previous videos, you can even incorporate some of those things maybe as we go along. So it'll all make sense when I get to that part. But I wanted to start with an experiment I did probably a year ago, and I never did a video for it. And that's why I wanted to do it this time, since I was doing another coffee dyeing series. So I am not in the situation where I can create these papers because of our weather right now. We are not in sunshine. We're in the middle of winter, and I created this set of papers I'm going to show you when I was in Studio B, which is, for one, it was in the summertime, I think, and it's a much warmer climate there. So I was able to just put the papers outside on a giant tray to dry with stencils on them. So I'm going to tell you how I did it, but the experiment that I did for this video is a little bit different. So if you haven't tried this, it is a great way to make papers. This is kind of what got me to actually creating my own stencils, because like I said, I was in Studio B when I did this experiment, and I was very limited on the stencils that I had. I only had maybe 1 or 2 stencils of that were big enough to even fit onto an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. I only had a few stencils, and so it got me to wanting to create my own stencils. That's a whole other series, and there are actually 2 of those as well. So these stencils were all purchased stencils before I started making my own. And really all I did to create these, I had gotten a tray that is like a catering size. So I think I was able to fit maybe 4 pieces of paper on one tray. I don't have those trays here. That's the other reason, is those trays are in California. So I don't have that ability here. Normally what I had done was, lay them out, put the stencils on it, and then put it out in the sunshine and let them dry. That's how you create these nice, clear, coffee-stained stenciled papers. And I don't have that ability here. I'm drying them on my floor in my studio again. So to do these, you would do them the normal way that you coffee stain paper, where you just dip it in a little coffee bath, and then you put the papers onto a tray or lay them around or whatever, put them in the oven to dry. You can't put them in the oven when you're doing stencils because the stencils will melt. So you have to dry them just naturally. Outside in the sunshine, to me, is what gave them this intensity. The ones that I have tried to do here in my studio on the floor, just letting them air dry, have not come out this intense. Now, I may be able to get them to that if I have stronger coffee and that sort of thing. And so I might try that. But these, I'm just going to show you real quick. I even did them on Vellum, and it didn't come out as well. But these were all done in the same way, dipping the paper, laying a stencil on it. This is on tracing paper, and I do like how these turned out. These are kind of like little tiles. But again, I had kind of odd size stencils to work with. These were on manila paper. So, like I said, these were done a year ago. I did some envelopes, just some recycled envelopes also. So you can, these were the little tiny fine Tim Holtz stencils. And so that kind of is cute. And then I put these together as kind of just a signature, maybe, just to see what they look like folded in half to put into a journal. So it's just a fun technique, a fun way to do that, even with, a text stencil. But this is all that I had to work with at that time. But I wanted you to see these because I wanted you to see how nice they came out. when you dry them in the sunshine. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside. That's not what we're doing today. I decided to do the whole bubble thing. If you've seen that, I'm going to show how that works, where you put stained bubbles onto your paper. I tried these on a variety of different papers, and the paper that you use does matter. Some of them come out better than others. Whether or not you start out with dry paper versus wetting your paper also made a difference. And then I also tried incorporating the stencils and the bubbles together. So since I can't demo all of these, again, because logistically, I need to do them on something other than a tray because I have to dry them on the floor in my studio. If I had a lot of trays that I could, put somewhere, then I wouldn't have to move these. And I think the best thing is to not move them once you have your bubbles down. You don't want them to pop. So it was easier for me to get down on the floor and actually create my papers there. And that's why I can't record and do this, because logistically it doesn't work. So I'm going to kind of walk through what some of the different experiments, and then I'll show you how I actually did it on just a couple. Okay, so the first batch that I have to show you are plain paper, and the paper was dry when I started, okay? And this is how they came out. So I actually had a few different items that I made my bubble water out of. I used coffee. I guess I can go ahead and show you this. So I have a coffee mixture, and I'll go through how the recipe and all that. I also did one with India ink. At the time that I did these papers, I also did one where I used this iridescent rich bronze acrylic ink. This did not work as well, and I'll show you why as I show you the papers. And then I also used some peacock feathers distressed oxide mixed into to see how that would work. And then I also ended up using, much later that did work, was using distress ink in my water, and that is this one here. So that one actually did work. Okay, so this one I used the India ink and the coffee on dry paper. And I'm going to show you when I do the demo that the size of your cells, these little bubbles, is dependent on the size of the little bottle that we're going to make. And I'll show you how that makes a difference. So this was on dry paper. One thing I did find interesting is they don't come out so great. I mean, they're still usable backgrounds, but you'll see compared to some different papers, they kind of bleed in, soak into the paper because it's very porous, but it's not really like watercolor paper. But I wanted to show what just regular cheap printer paper would be like. Now this is the back side. So just from the bubbles sitting on the top, they soak through and they actually leave a nice, in some cases, better imprint on the back side. So you do still get a double-sided paper, and that's kind of nice. This one, I'm going to guess that I did them the same way. And this was with the oxides and with coffee. And they really kind of, you don't even see the bubbles. I think these light spots that are on here, I may have splattered citrus on that after just to get some kind of pattern. It's a pretty paper, but it does not represent the bubble idea at all. And again, this was on plain paper. This one, they came out a little better, again on dry paper. So, some of them ended up just kind of bleeding and making a big mess. This is the back side again. So not horrible. Any of these papers that I'm not happy with, it didn't achieve the look that I was trying to get. They're okay. They're still usable. And you can, use this and do some of our other techniques again after the fact, just to make this a paper that you like. So I'm not going to toss any of my, what I consider fails. I don't know that I considered this a fail, but these didn't really turn out. Again, on plain paper, I thought I might try putting a stencil down and then doing the bubbles. And the stencil I used for this is one of my own, and it was this stencil. And so I just had the white paper. You can see that most of the paper on the back here, you can tell that it was white underneath. So I just laid a stencil on it and then did my bubbles. And I think because these cells are so small, these little openings, it kind of all just ended up running together and made a big mess. So again, with just cheap copy paper, printer paper. This one isn't horrible again, and this is the back side. But again, you know, some of my bubbles didn't work out real well, and it's not very, you know, even or anything. But it almost looks like I was experimenting with not wetting one side and then wetting the other side with just the coffee water mixture, and then doing my bubbles in the India ink color. And that's kind of looks like what I did here, just to kind of compare the difference. So I just did it on the one side though, putting coffee on the top. So not horrible, not perfect. This again was another one of my stencils, and that's this one. It didn't work out for this experiment, but you'll see later I used it again, and the fact that these openings are really big does help. So if you do want to do the stencil idea, you want something maybe with lots of openings so that you'll really see the bubbles in between. And I did a better one later that I'll show you. Again, using with the oxide didn't work at all. You do see some little bubbles in here. You know, there's a few that kind of held up, but for the most part, everything just made a mess. So this again was a fail that can be used though by adding maybe some more layers or not. And then again, this is just another mess that didn't work out very well at all. And another one, this was with much larger bubbles, and that didn't really work out either. So plain copy paper is not the best. This one, again, was later. It kind of takes practice. So, you know, this one probably came out the best of all of them as far as having the number of bubbles that held. And that might have been, maybe my mixture was a little soap heavier on this one than the earlier ones, or just from practice. So plain paper might be fun to practice on, but you're going to get really discouraged because they're not going to turn out very well. Okay, so the next thing I did was try again with plain paper, just as a comparison, wetting my paper first. So, and these are in no particular order, but this was using my coffee water mixture. And part of what I did is I have this spray bottle that has a mixture of coffee and tea. And so I was just spraying it to get it wet instead of using my brush that I did in the other videos. Just sprayed it and then tried doing my bubbles on it. And as you can see, very few held up. So that didn't really work out either. And another one also did not work out. You can see a little bit here, but it's really subtle. So not really worth it on that one either. Now these I did with the stencil. I think this one's with these three. I did trying to do the stencils, wetting the paper, putting the stencil down, and in this case, I don't think I tried doing any bubbles. This one, you can see that the in-betweens on this are light. What happens is on these, I think I laid the stencil and just sprayed. And so that's why it's much lighter underneath. Where the ones that I did at Studio B, I dipped the paper in the coffee water and then laid it out and put the stencil on. And sitting it out in the sunshine, it's out there for a while, and all of the coffee kind of pools, you know, it's just going to be darker in those spots. And I think the UV, the sunshine, has a lot to do with how intense those are. So subtle, but I see the pattern. I think you're better than you do. Same with this one. And this one, I think I did try to do the bubbles. But, I mean, they come out okay. They're just not as intense as the other one. But I think that's still really pretty. And these stencils, again, this is one of mine. Now, like I said, I have videos on how I made all of these. Is it this one? Yeah, so that's this one. I was trying to see ones with the thicker stencil, less space in between, what those would look like versus ones that had a skinnier plastic and more space in between. And this one was another one of mine from my doodles. And again, it didn't work out at all, but it's a pretty busy stencil. So this one, I think I did another one later that worked out a little bit better. But again, that's just, you know, putting this down and then spritzing it. And the tea or coffee kind of just went under everything, and it wasn't intense enough, I think, and also did not have the light. I mean, you can see it a little bit, but it's not that great. And then I think there was ground coffee on my mat, maybe, or I sprinkled it. Don't know why I did that, but anyway, that one didn't turn out either. So you're seeing a lot of fails, and I think it's good to show you that too, so that you see how much you have to maybe practice to get something you like. This one, I only have a little bit of bubbles, but I really like how they would be in color, you know, if that did work. So I think doing something like this with the color, but doing it on the right paper would be better. And I don't think I tried using this on the papers that I should have been using to see if I could get a good one. Again, another one that didn't work. And I don't know what it was. I mean, part of it could have just been the paper and the fact that I'm not using the correct paper for this. Same thing, you see a little bit of it is really subtle. And then this one came out a little bit better, and I think this paper feels a little heavier, but I thought this was the same paper, but it's just with the coffee, and you can see some of the little bubbles there. Just not as good. And I think when I did this one, you can see I put salt on it too, just to see if I could get some more texture and the bubbles. So the bubbles are really tiny. I think part of this too is this was my first bubble maker that I had, and it was making a finer bubble. I have improved that, and I found the size that I like. So I'll show you that when we go through the actual demo of how to do all of this. I did then go ahead and try some other papers. This one is with mixed media paper, but it's just the children's one. I just went through and tried to grab whatever papers I might have. So this one actually came out kind of decent on this one. So I did one dry with this paper, and that's again with my stencil. Now this one, the first time I did it, I put the stencil, the swirly one, this one, I put this down. Maybe get all this out of the way. On dry paper, you can tell because it's very white where all the plastic was. So I tried this, and then two colors of the bubbles, the one with the coffee on one side and then the black. And it wasn't working out great as far as seeing bubbles. It was really kind of just soaking around and not really leaving me a bubble imprint. So I decided I'm not going to give up on it. I went back again and added my citrus and just splattered it to kind of get things even. And then you'll see here, I also splattered some of my India ink mixed with water. And I don't know that I might have put just a little bit of salt on this too. So I was just trying to fix one that I could tell right away was not going to turn out. And so it has at least more going on. So even if you're doing one and you can see right away, like in those earlier ones, when I saw that it was just making big blobs, I could have went in right then and maybe threw some salt down or threw some lemon juice down like we did in the previous videos and tried to make those papers more interesting. So if you're seeing initially that you're doing a fail, the bubbles are just going away right away, then, fix it with something else. So then this one, I decided to do the same paper, but wet it first. And so I wet it with coffee, and then I used the India ink. And then all of these little darker spots, when I made my little containers here that I'll show you, one of them makes bigger bubbles, and that is the India ink, the black one. And then I had, and now I've changed what it is, I had one that made smaller bubbles, but it was with the metallic that ended up not working. And I went ahead and used it up. You'll see it in some other ones, but what it ended up doing was that acrylic ink is like heavier. Even though it's all mixed in, when you would blow the bubbles and put it on here, the metallic would almost clump up. And so all those little dark, weird spots that don't look like bubbles, they're just maybe the edge of a bubble that had that metallic. So it didn't really work at all. My intention was to have some bubbles that were metallic bubbles, and it just didn't play well at all with the acrylic ink. So I don't mind how this looks, it's fine. But, it was just my experiment figuring out that particular metallic, and I think it's because it's acrylic, did not work. Okay, so not a total fail, but not my favorite. Then I also grabbed a paint pad. This is just, it says ideal for watercolors and acrylics. And this is just, it's just Walmart's brand, and I found this in the kids section. I was just trying to find some different papers that weren't very expensive to play with. So that's what I used for these couple, and they did not work very well either. So this one would have been dry to start. You see all the white, so I did not wet that at the beginning. And then I just did the black bubbles. But you can see they didn't really hold up. The bubbles already just kind of wanted to change shape as soon as it started soaking into the paper. So I tried one where I wet the paper first, and that would not even hold a bubble at all. So, you know, this is just kind of a background that I can add more to it now if I want, but that did not work well at all. Then I thought, well, I'm gonna get better paper. So I tried this Canson watercolor paper, and this one is 140-pound paper. So it's heavier than maybe I want to use. I'm thinking, and all the watercolor paper I happen to have is really heavy, but it did come out with a really pretty pattern. So, you know, for maybe a cover or something, because this is nice and heavy, it might be really nice. To do this one, you can see my bubbles cells came out. I really like them. It almost looks reptilian. It's a completely different look, and they don't really look like bubbles so much, but I really like it. And to do this one, you see these other circles here, and I don't really know why they're blue, but again, this was another one of my stencils, like so. This was done with just white background, and then putting my bubbles down. These two would have been the darker using the India ink. And then this was just a swath of the coffee stain with the stencil. And so I leave this, you know, when I did this, I just moved it after the bubbles were on it. So you let it dry with this sitting on there. The interesting thing about these two, if you look, this is the back side. So I don't know if it just soaks through and leaves this really cool pattern on the back side. I don't believe I had laid it on anything that had bubbles on it. So I think that's really just them soaking through. I'm not really sure. That's just unintentional. The next thing I tried was mixed media paper, and that is this brand, the Canson again, but just mixed media paper. So some of them are large because I left them large, and then some of them I cut down. So you're going to see two different sizes, but it's the same paper. So this one was, I wet it with coffee, and then I did the bubbles, and that didn't really work. But this is the funny thing. This is the top side. This is where all my bubbles were sitting. And you can see where I have some of them, the little ones. I got a little impatient with this because these were little puddles. And so I just dried them because I wanted to finish up, but it wasn't really showing up any of my bubbles very well anyway. So it was laying this way. This was the top of it, but look at the back side. That came out really cool, like the other one. So this is where my puddles were. So it was really soaked into the paper. But this is the back side, and it actually came out better than the front. And then this one came out not bad. This is dry, same mixed media paper, but I didn't wet it first. And I don't think you'll be able to see this, but this was the metallic bubbles, the ones where it kind of, you see the little darker spots. But that's all I used on this one. Now my little bin of bubble soap it was the metallic one, but I had cross-contaminated with the little water bottle that I used. So you see that it's a little bit darker than maybe that bronze color. And I don't think this shows up on camera at all. But to me, I can see that each one of those little cells is just the slightest enough color that you see the shape, but it has metallic in it. And so these little darker spots are where that metallic paint just kind of sat there because it was like thicker in that spot. So again, this one actually is a nice overall pattern, and that was doing it dry on the mixed media paper. And then this one, let me see if I can tell. I think all of these, this one I did not wet. Okay, so this one looks like I did wet it, but I just spritzed it. It's not really wet. Spritzed it with the spray bottle of coffee tea mixture. And again, used the darker one here. And then I also used some metallic because that's why it's really kind of goopy on those darker spots. But that one is not horrible. And this was just spritzing my paper with a spray bottle. Again, that larger mixed media paper. And then this one, same thing. You can actually see on the back side, this was a different garbage bag that had a pattern on it. So that actually transferred a little bit. But this one, again, just sprayed so that it's not a white background, and then laying 2 stencils on it, and then doing the bubbles after the stencils were down. So this one didn't turn out horrible. You see all the bubbles in between. And again, this is on the mixed media paper. So that's kind of a fun one that I'll try again to see if I can get some clearer look. Now I did coffee on this side and then the black India ink on this side. But that's kind of a cool look to have it be between the stencils. So maybe I'll play with in a demo, maybe do something like that again too. And then this one, the same paper, but I did not get it wet. It's still white. And this was just putting the bubbles down. And they actually really kind of hold up better in a way when they're dry, you know, when the paper's dry. And that may be why these turned out okay, because I just used a spray bottle. So there, it's not a lot of tea or coffee mixture on it. It's just a slight amount as opposed to brushing it all on. But this one I think kind of turned out pretty good. And then, let's see, what's this? This is some more, I think these are just some more stencils I was playing. This didn't turn out very well. This one, it looks like I added salt to it because I can even see the texture. So just trying to see, using the technique that we did before. I didn't splatter and all that, but just using a little of my citrus and salt just to try to see if I could get some texture through my stencil. And then this was that floral one again that I decided to try. So I wet the paper and then put the stencil on and just let it sit. It came out a little bit better. And then, of course, I had to try a couple more things because I love doing vellum. And this was actually kind of okay. So my first attempt was leaving the vellum dry. And again, let me grab this white piece of paper. Because I did this and then tried to take it over to the bag and it started curling up. So there are no bubbles here because my paper was rolling. But I really like how that, you know, that came out pretty good. And you also feel that bubble texture in the vellum too. So I was happy with this, even though it didn't work out really well. It was encouraging. Now this again was with metallic, and it's kind of clumpy there. And that's what I realized. I don't really like that. It looks like a mistake. So that wasn't my favorite, but it encouraged me to try again. So here was another one. And this one, I think, from the look of it, if I can remember now, I think I wet this paper first. And so you see where some of my coffee, because I wet the paper first, these kind of stripy things, if you can see that, where the paper was already getting very wrinkled, like you saw in the last video that I used vellum. And then I went back with my India ink one and did the bubbles, but it was already the paper was already really wrinkling. But it held, you know, it held some of the bubbles. It wasn't horrible. And because I had wet it both sides again, I was able to get my paper to at least lay flat. Again, the interesting thing is this is the top side. When you look at the back side, it's almost like the bubbles come out more clear on the back side because they've just been sitting there protected longer, I guess. So that was kind of interesting. But I really like the vellum. I think those are really interesting. And I think scanned and then printed again on vellum would be really nice. Now this one, I did an experiment because if you watched the last video, I had that piece of vellum that I really liked that looked like tree branches, I called them. And I hadn't done too much on it. And this is the front of that paper. And so I decided I'm going to scan it and then do the bubbles on top of it and see what happens. So again, that was my experiment. If you have a paper or something that you've done and you're not happy with it, it's dried already and it's kind of, you thought it was finished and it just didn't turn out good. Don't give up on it. Do something else to it. So I flipped this one over on the back side. I scanned the front and then I flipped it over and I just put bubbles down and they came out really pretty good. So this is the back side of my tree branch paper. And I really kind of like it. So it actually just added some interest, you know, to kind of a paper that had something on it and I liked it, but I wanted to see if I could add, if it would mess up what was there before, or just be an added layer. And I like how that turned out. So we have that. The other one that I tried was tracing paper. I hadn't used it in any of the previous videos, but when I was looking through my papers, I found this, and I saw that I had also used it with the stencils. And so I wanted to try it with the bubbles and see if I could do something, knowing that I could also use a stencil on this if I wanted to. But this is just, I'll lay it on these other pieces just so you can kind of see. But it came out pretty well. And this was, again, just doing it dry. I didn't wet it ahead. And so I have only done this one experiment, so maybe I'll do another one. But you can see how there's larger bubbles from the back, and then there were still some little tiny ones on the top as they were popping. You know, you want to keep them as intact as you can, but over time as they're drying, some of these larger ones were already dry in there, but then I still had some little small ones remaining, and so they held on. But it's just kind of a fun, different, kind of a reptilian looking pattern, or some of them look like little cobblestone path or something like that. So I just thought it was another fun thing to try. So now that I've shown you all my experiment, I'm going to use something a little bit different just for this. You can use a cookie tray. If you're able to, maybe you're multitasking and you have plenty of time to let them dry in the tray, then you can, or maybe you have multiple cookie trays. The tray that I had, and I'll have to get one for this studio, is the one I had at Studio B. Is I got it at Smart and Final, and it's, if you don't have that kind of store, it's like a grocery store, but it's where a lot of restaurant supply and stuff is also there. So they have a whole aisle of just kind of like cheap catering or restaurant, you know, prep kind of things for the kitchen. And they have these really large trays. That worked out great because I could just not have to disturb them, take them out and let them dry. So if I had a bunch of those, I could at least be doing 4 sheets at a time. I don't have that here. And I wanted to be able to slide my papers off as carefully as possible. And the cookie tray that I've been using has little edges. So I found this under my work table, and it's just a scrap piece of wood that's like particle board. And I don't know what I had used it for before, but I wanted to use it just because it was flat and I could slide papers right off. So that's what I'm going to use for this. I've covered it in packing tape just so that, because I'm putting water liquid on it. So I'm going to use this. I think I'm going to grab a piece of this tracing paper just because it's right here on top. Maybe experiment on this first so you can see how it behaves, since we haven't used that yet. It's just real thin like deli paper, but it's tracing paper, so it doesn't have like that coating on it that some deli papers do. Wet deli papers. So we're going to use this. That previous one, I think I found with this and the Vellum, it works better if you don't get it wet first. Well, the Vellum you have to because it doesn't lay flat. So this one though, when I did the previous one, I did not get it wet first. So this may be a total fail, but because I haven't done it where I got it wet first, I'm going to do that here. Okay. The other thing that I need is my little soapy liquid and kind of a vehicle. And these look horrible because I've just let them sit in here, and so they've soaked up all of my liquid. There's multiple things you can use to create these little vehicles. You want a water bottle for sure, and I'll put this one here. This is the one that I had been using last year when I started, and I just still had it. So I've made 2 more since then because I was trying to get smaller, different size bubbles. So for this one, you just take a water bottle, cut off the bottom of it. You need a rubber band or some twine, something that you can tie this on. And then this is just from like a bag of onions or lemons or any kind of produce. You know, they come in these little bags of plastic that just look like mesh. So you want something with some kind of holes in it. And that's going to determine the size of your bubbles. So I'll kind of do a demo of each of these because I have 3 different sizes here. So this one is just another little plastic container. And I started out with maybe, I don't know, 1/4 inch of water in this. And then you want just some soap. So normally a clear soap works. This is blue, but it really didn't show the color. So it was fine. So this is just dish soap, hand soap, any kind of soap. And probably for that much water, maybe a tablespoon of soap, a fair amount, so you get lots of bubbles. And then you just mix that up. So for this one, I also used the Distress ink in Scorched Timber. So that's what color I have in here. And I probably just did a little, squeeze with the dropper. So you can kind of get an idea of how dark that is. Now, the darker, obviously the darker your bubbles are going to be. So if you don't use as much ink, you may get a real pale color. And then this one, same thing, water bottle, cut off the bottom. But the fabric I used, you can see, you almost can't see any holes in it. That was using some of this. So I want to show you so you can see how fine that weave is. So, you know, there's a weave to that. And this is just scrim. You've seen me use this a lot. So it's just a real kind of, you know, thin fabric. So that, and then I've just tied it on. Now it's this color because it's been sitting in bubble coffee water. So again, I used my instant coffee and then the same amount. So I've just been using it. So that's why I have less. But I, again, started with probably that, you know, 1/4 inch or so of water to a tablespoon of soap. And then again, you make it as strong as you want for what color you want. And then this one, same thing, but this was with the India ink. And now this one has a much more open weave. And I don't know if you can see that. And for that, I used cheesecloth. And I'll show you how open. I was concerned. I already had the one with the mesh bag that was more open. So I wanted something in between. So what I did is instead of taking just one layer of this, which would have been more open, I had the 3 layers because this is pretty thin, you know. So if you're using something like this, I used all the layers, and that made it a little, you know, in between those other 2. So that's what I used to make my little vehicles here. So I'm just going to start with this. Like I said, I'll go ahead and use my coffee mixture that I had from the other day, just what I have left. And I'm just going to see what happens. This is on the tracing paper. Now see how it's curling up? It's going to do just like that vellum did. So I need to get this side wet also and see if I can flip it and stick it down. So what's going to be tricky is trying to get this transferred. And that's why I wasn't going to do a lot of these on camera, because it's tricky. If I had this just on my garbage bag and doing all of this, I wouldn't have to move it at all. And I think that's how I lose a lot of my bubbles. So just for sake of showing you though, I'm going to go ahead and take the black one. Oops, and I'm dripping over already. That's how you end up getting some of those blobs. So if you don't want that, maybe mop them up with a towel. And then I'm just going to come over here and try not to get my head too much in the shot, but I'm going to just blow this. And you can see the size of the bubbles that I have here. And I'll hold this up at the end so you can kind of see the underneath layer. And I'll do all of these just so you can see the difference. So this is the vegetable mesh one with the scorched timber. And you can see those bubbles are larger than these other bubbles. So I'm going to turn this just for myself, keep my head out of this, and I'll do another little spot over here. Okay, and I'm fairly close with my bottle to the paper, I'd say 1 inch or so. And you want to be careful when you do this. Inhale before you put your mouth on this bottle, and then exhale, because you don't want to be inhaling this soap. And you can see how much smaller these bubbles are. So I'm going to see if I can hold this up to the camera. So the ones on the top, you know, those are going to, especially if I'm talking into it, those are going to pop first. But you want the ones underneath, I don't know if you can see that, to stay for a while, as long as possible, because that's, the bubble is holding the color. And that's what's going to make that little cell be the size that it is. So now the trick is I need to try to get this moved off to my garbage bag. Again, my recommendation is do these wherever they're going to be drying. So like I need to just be down on the floor blowing bubbles onto my papers, because then I wouldn't have to move it and they're going to turn out much better. In fact, I think some of the ones that turned out the best that I showed you, I was doing them on the floor. So trying to do them up here and then transfer them is when you kind of get that mess. So I'm going to see if I have any luck. And then if this dries, I'll show you these that we're doing during this demo at the end of the video. Okay, that wasn't horrible. And I'm going to clean the bubbles off of this. I think this watercolor paper did the really nice one. So I'm going to do, I think, this one with a stencil to show you that process. And so for this one, I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to spritz some of this just because my coffee's getting low. So this is my backside. Just so I can get this to kind of lay down for myself here. I went ahead and did the backside. I probably shouldn't have, but I'm thinking that on my garbage bag, it will leave me some nice wrinkles. And I might even, for fun, throw some salt onto my garbage bag so that at least I get some fun texture on the back side of this in case I want it to be a double-sided something. I may not, but I might, so. Okay, so I have that, and then maybe a stencil. Without pulling out another one, I think this worked out well before. I liked the look of it. So I'm just gonna kind of center that there. And now I can go in with my bubbles. And let's see, I really like how the black has been looking, but let me try a little more of this scorched timber. Actually, I think what I might do before then, just to get some layers and for the sake of fun and experiment, I'm gonna go ahead and put some salt on this for that texture that I like and see what happens. Now, it might pop all my bubbles, but I'm gonna do it anyway. And actually, I'm also gonna do this. I'm gonna do some of my lemon juice. Just so I can see, you know, if you can get multi-layers when you're doing bubble work here. Okay. Now I kind of like, I don't know if you can see this, but I have some really tiny ones underneath the large ones, which is going to kind of be cool. So let me turn this around so that I can try to keep my head out of the shot. Okay, if I can get this up where you can see it. Now I want to see you to see what this looks like, because it's not going to look like this at the end. But I want you to see how many are there now. And I'm kind of missing a whole void right there. You can see where some of them are so big, it's almost like I have a void of no bubbles in some spots. So I'm going to see if I can go ahead and correct some of that. Okay, that was better. Now I have some tiny ones in there too. Okay, so I'm going to try to go and transfer this and see. You can see where I'm already losing some of the large ones here. So we'll see what happens. I can always add some splatters and things like that later on if this, you know, isn't busy enough for me. This is the kids mixed media paper, the cheap one, I think. But I think I'm going to try it to see if I can get anything out of this. I'm not sure what this is, but I'm going to try it. I'm not sure which one this is. I'll figure it out later maybe. So let's see. Let me try a stencil again. I'll try this one. I'm going to try this, laying this on and then just doing bubbles to see what happens. And let me use I'm going to use this really fine one. Okay, I have no idea if that's going to show anything up or not. I think my coffee is not very dark is part of my problem, is it's not intense enough. So I'm tempted to just, let me see. So now it's kind of there, but I want it darker in my coffee without mixing up some more. So let's see. Those were pretty big. I'm going to go in with the black one just because of the size, and I think it's going to show up better. Now I can see that the color here is darker. I started here and went that way. So I'm going to put it back in here so I can get more ink on it again. And then maybe go from this way to this way. Okay, I don't know if you can see through that at all, but I do have bubbles down. So I'm going to try to move this one again and see if I get lucky. Now, because I have the same paper here and I don't know what it is, I'm going to do a wet one since the other one was kind of dry. So I'll wet this one and see what happens. Because I'm wetting this with coffee, if I want to use that other coffee one for the small bubbles, which I kind of do, I need to make it much darker. So what I might try, and it might not work, is since the oxide didn't really work at all, I might try one of those Delusions inks and just put it in with my coffee. I don't know how many more of these I'm going to do anyway. Put it in with my coffee, and it'll turn it kind of a green, you know, a weird color, but I don't care. I might end up liking it. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to use the turquoise vine because I love turquoise. And I'm just going to put some in here. I have no idea what this is going to do. And I put quite a bit, which was maybe wasting it, but I'm going to see if I can get a color out of this. Ooh, I don't know. I might like it. I know the other one wasn't intense enough. Okay, so I think I'm going to do a stencil again. Let's do this one because it's fairly open also. Okay, and I'll see if I can, I don't know if that'll do anything. I think this one also, this little container, it might be such small bubbles that may be why they end up seeming like they're all mooshed together. I don't know, we'll find out. I'm gonna go transfer this one and see if we get lucky. I think that's all I'm going to do for now because I want to see how those dry, and this video is getting very long. So you get the gist, I think, of what I'm trying to experiment with to get some different techniques. So I'm going to let those dry, and then I am going to bring them back just so you can see how they turned out since you watched me actually do them. And if I don't like them, then I can show you how I might fix them. So I'll be back in a few hours. Okay, I'm back with the dry papers that we did, but I have these dry, so I wanted to show you. This one was the tracing paper. I had not tried this technique at all on tracing paper, so I wanted to see how that worked out. And it didn't work out great, but I will be doing another video because I had a light bulb moment, and so I'm actually doing some more samples, some more experiments, and I'm going to be doing another video because they are working and I think they're going to come out great. So this was tracing paper. Let me see if I can find a white something to put this behind so you can see it better. So it's a nice paper. I didn't get a lot. I have bubbles through here. They kind of popped around the edges, but it still at least stained the paper there, and so I don't hate this. But like I said, I did come up with a technique using tracing paper that comes out perfect, I think. So I will be doing another video, but that was the one we did in this video. And then this one, I really like how this turned out. So it seems like watercolor paper is the best thing for this. And this is the one that I had wetted on both sides. I sprayed the tea and then brushed it. And you can see this is the back side. So I got all the nice wrinkles from my garbage bags. And so I like this, so it can make it double-sided. This is really heavy, so it's maybe not something for a journal page, but it would be a nice notebook cover. And by doing the reverse side, I can just fold this in half and then just maybe sew in one signature and I would have a nice cover. So I don't mind this at all, or even just framing this as artwork on your wall. But it's on watercolor paper, like I said, and I had done the coffee tea mixture, and then I had also added salt and the lemon juice. So the salt on this watercolor paper, you can see the effect of it. Those little small dots are where there was salt. But on watercolor paper, this one was the real heavy. I think it's 140. Yes, it's 140 pounds or 300 G size. And I'm guessing it's because this paper is already so thick that you don't actually feel the texture of the salt on this one, but you do see the little dots, these little tiny ones. That's all salt. And then where there are lighter spots, but kind of bigger, like here is one. You can kind of see that was doing the citrus splatters. So I do like that because it gave me like a background that has texture on it as far as the color. So the salt and then the lighter spots are the underlayer. And then I used the stencil, but because I had already sprayed the tea coffee mixture, all of that color really settled under my stencil. And so you get this really nice effect. And I really like this open of a stencil for this kind of technique because you really get to see the stencil itself, but then you also see that layer behind it. And then as far as the bubbles, I think because you put bubbles on an already wet surface, some of them just kind of spread out and pop and you don't really see them, but it did hold up. These really tiny ones kind of attached themselves to the stencil. And so that came out as a really cool effect. So I do like how this one turned out, and I could see doing this with some color also. So I might have to do some more in this style, maybe try it with some other different stencils. So maybe I'll do that in my play day today. This one did not turn out as well, but I do like the effect of it. The stencil, this one was done on just dry paper. You could see all the white that is where the stencil was laying. And then the open areas are where my bubbles showed through. And I like that, except that you don't see the stencil as much because you did get some bleeding through here. This might be a prettier effect had I sprayed this, done something underneath so that I didn't have just the white. So maybe like do some kind of two-tone color thing. You'll still get all the bleeding, but I'm thinking if I wet this paper, even if I wet it just with water so that I still have white, it would have allowed my stencil to maybe stick down to the paper better, and then I wouldn't have as much kind of bleeding in and around my pattern. Like this one, you see how clear the stencil came out because it was sitting on something that was already wet, so it kind of helped it stick down. So I'm thinking that might be a trick, is when you want to use a stencil, make sure there's some moisture, whether it's clear water or if you do tea stain and then maybe your bubbles are a different color, that kind of thing, just so your stencil will be a little more clear. So this one was on just the cheap art paper. Yes, this one was on this mixed media paper that was just the inexpensive one. And then same with this. I believe this is the same paper. I can tell from the size. So this one was the one we did the smaller green colored bubbles. Again, the other stencil, and same thing. This one, I believe I had sprayed first so that it was wet on both sides. So I did get this kind of wrinkly pattern from my bags on the back, and then also where the bubbles came through. So this is the back side, but that's interesting, And then again, where there was more ink from the green, that comes through the back more intense also. So again, the stencil's not very clear, but you do see that kind of pattern on pattern look. So I think these two, part of why they're not as good is that they are on cheaper mixed media paper, whereas this one that turned out really nice is on watercolor paper. So they may, you know, make lighter weight watercolor paper. I'll have to see if I have anything that's a lighter weight, because then you could use it more for journal pages. This works, I mean, but it's pretty thick. And then again, I'm gonna do another exciting technique that I think is really gonna work well. So I thought this was gonna be the last video, but it is not. So I will do at least one more, and then I'm gonna choose my favorites. I may do some more experimenting just so I have some really good ones. And then I will do a digital kit for that. So there will be another video when I do a digital kit. That may take a little time. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Please give me a thumbs up if you did. Leave comments down below, any questions, that sort of thing. And I will see you next time. So have a great rest of your day. Now go make something. Bye.